In the last video, we talked about the qualities of inverted intervals. So for example, we took the interval of a perfect fifth and we inverted it by taking the bottom note and putting it on the top. You might be asking yourself, well, why do we bother doing this? Why is this an important thing to learn about? There are a few things. One is the intervals actually have a certain consistent sound when you invert them, and composers take advantage of that when they compose music. So it's important to be able to categorize intervals that way. And the other reason is that it might actually make it easier for you to identify and write intervals, knowing what happens when you invert them. So let's look at both of those things. First of all, the fifth. Many people would say it's a very consonant sound. It's a very open sound, not what you'd call a rich sound, but sort of a plain sound. And it has to do with the ratio of those frequencies being very clear and simple. And the same is the case when you turn it into a fourth. There's a kind of consistent sound between a perfect fifth and a perfect fourth. If you took another interval like a major third, it's a very rich consonant sound, a very beautiful sound. Those are thirds. And when you invert it, you turn it into a sixth. You take the bottom note and put it on the top. And you get a major sixth becomes, a major third becomes a minor sixth. And you can kind of hear that the sound is rather similar too. They're both very rich, beautiful sounding intervals. If you take the minor third, it's also a consonant sound and rather rich. And if you invert it, again, a kind of a rich, beautiful sound. There's a similarity of sound between the minor third and the major sixth. The last one we looked at was a second. Most people would say that the second is a dissonant sound. It's a little bit harsh to the ear. And likewise, if you invert it and put that bottom note on the top, the minor seventh also is a pretty dissonant sound. So a similarity of sound. And there is the minor second, which is only a half step away. Very dissonant. And if you invert it by putting that C on the top, the major seventh, again, very dissonant. And the last ones that we'll look at would be, for example, the diminished interval. Maybe the diminished fifth is the same sound as an augmented fourth. As a matter of fact, those sounds are exactly the same. They're both tritones. So let me show you how you might be also able to use this information to help you to actually write and recognize intervals. If I were to write the interval or ask you to say, well, what is the interval from a C to an A flat? And you'd say, well, that is some kind of a sixth, but I'm not really sure what kind. And I'd say, well, why don't you invert it and tell me what that is? So you'll take the C and put it on the top. And you say, oh, this is easy because I can count the half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I know that 4 half steps is a major third. Well, because of what you know about inverted intervals, if the inversion is a major third, the original must have been a minor sixth. So a lot of people, when they have to name or write the intervals of the sixth, the various intervals of the sixth, they actually invert them first and then name the inversion. And that helps them to name the interval. Here's another example. What is the interval from E flat to C? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see it's 6 letters of the alphabet. It's some kind of a sixth. Is it major, minor, diminished, augmented? Well, invert it. Put the E flat on the top. You can see that's a third. It's 3 half steps. So the inversion is a minor third. That's pretty easy. The thirds should be pretty simple for you to figure out. So if that's a minor third when inverted, it must be a major sixth before the inversion. You can also do this with the sevenths. We talked about this a little bit already. A seventh would be from here to here. And if the question is, well, what kind of a seventh is that? You could say, well, let me invert it first. The inversion is a minor second. Therefore, the original interval must have been a major seventh. Let's take one that's a little more difficult. What about from here to here? That's a seventh. 7 notes of the alphabet from B to A sharp. What kind of a seventh is it? Major seventh, minor seventh? Let's invert it. Take that and put this here. The inversion is a minor second. And we know by the rules of inversion, then the original must have been a major seventh. Let's try one more. How about from E flat to D flat? That's some kind of a seventh. What kind of a seventh is it? Let's invert it. Put the E flat on the top. Oh, you can see it's 2 half steps. So that must be a major second. Then the original must have been a minor seventh. Because remember, we know that when inverted, sevenths become seconds, majors become minors. So with that knowledge, you just may be able to figure out some of these more difficult intervals by first figuring out the inversion.